Oral questions by members.
House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there is a huge gap between the Premier's rhetoric and announcements and the terrible results of more violence across British Columbia. Random attacks have become the new norm under this soft-on-crime Premier and are clear evidence that what his government says they're doing is simply not working. On Saturday morning, an innocent victim was slashed across the throat with a knife while riding a bus in Surrey. The attacker first threatened a complete stranger at a bus stop before boarding the bus. He then stabbed the second victim with a knife, a kitchen knife, in a brutal, random, and completely unprovoked attack that sent the victim to hospital with critical life-threatening injuries. According to the nurse, the only reason he survived was because the knife was dull. So my question to the Premier is this: how much longer will people have to be afraid to get on a bus because of this soft-on-crime Premier's catch-and-release policies and this Premier's failure to keep British Columbians safe in their communities?
Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member. As the member will know, that this particular took place on Saturday. It was a horrific crime. The police were there, they arrested the individual, and they started to do their full investigation. At that time, they were facing serious criminal charges here in British Columbia. During the course of their investigation, they became aware of evidence of allegations of links to a terrorist organization. At that particular point in time, the federal RCMP take over the investigation. Federal Crown takes over the prosecution from provincial Crown, and an investigation currently in regard to the rest of the situation is underway by both federal RCMP and federal Crown. That's the information that I can provide the member with at this particular point in time on this very serious incident.
House Leader, supplemental.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality today is that people in British Columbia aren't safe on a bus. They're not safe to walk into a coffee shop. They're not safe in walking down streets in their communities. And that's all because of this soft-on-crime Premier's catch-and-release policies. Violent random attacks have actually never been worse in British Columbia than they are right now. And even the Premier's hand-picked expert, Doug Lepard, says that British Columbia stands alone with a 40% decrease in the number of people in jail because of government policy, because of initiatives of this Premier, this soft-on-crime Premier. Now, the Premier promised results that people, he said, would feel, that they will be able to see, but every single day there's another horrifying story of violence, whether it be in Surrey or Langley or Kamloops and communities across this province. Chilliwack today is the scene of gang violence and shootings for the third time in 8 days. And now, this random knife attack on the bus in Surrey that I mentioned is being treated by the police as terrorism, fueling more public anxiety and insecurity. So the question is this: the Premier keeps saying he's taking action to keep people safe. With that in mind, and in response to this possible terrorist attack, has the province elevated the risk assessment level, and are additional patrols being deployed in the Lower Mainland to keep British Columbians safe?
Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member. It is unfortunate that the opposition is using language that when they know the facts of the particular incident that took place on Saturday does nothing to help the situation. The reality is this: an attack took place. It was the police investigated. They were there. They arrested the individual. During the course of their investigation, it became aware of allegations of a link to a terrorist organization. As I said at that point, the federal RCMP take over, as does the Crown. Any increase, and my ministry is in touch with them at this particular point in time. The issue of alerts and things like that has not been an issue that the federal RCMP has said needs to be in place, but rather they are dealing with this situation and this individual. I would also note, though, because the member raised the issue of the situation in Surrey and the ongoing gang violence that we do have in this province, violence which has been something that British Columbia has had to deal with, as all provinces, but ours is particularly is a unique situation in this province in terms of those involved for quite some time. And I just want to reinforce the action that this government has taken. For example, the Witness Security Program, which, as I outlined the other day, has resulted in 419 charges being laid, including 134 murder charges and the convictions of more than 32 accused. Those individuals involved in gang crime would not have been brought to justice. They would not be behind bars if it was not for the action of this government and the implementation of this program. Honourable Speaker, we continue to take this situation extremely seriously, and will take additional measures and steps as they are needed as we work with our partners in law enforcement and the federal government to identify how we can reinforce the work that they're doing.
Member for Surrey South.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The reality is that the things that the member from the other side brings up are, again, things that this government does after the fact, after people have already become victims of crime. People in my community of Surrey, I've received many emails and calls from people who feel terrified to ride the bus. They feel upset because the reality is that random attacks are up and at a crisis level in this province. Mr. Speaker, a prolific offender who brutally attacked a mother and her toddler in a random Chinatown assault is now free in the community. Shaquan David Kelly, responsible for 5 brutal random assaults, received time served and a single day in jail for the 4 charges. Disturbingly, Provincial Crown Counsel dropped the charge for the vicious attack on the mother and toddler. This is the attack that the former NDP Attorney General dismissed as anecdotal rhetoric. Despite all of the Premier's promises and rhetoric, why was the charge stayed for the vicious random attack on a mother and her toddler in Chinatown?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think everybody in this House agrees that people need to feel safe in their communities. And when we hear about traumatic incidents in our communities, we stand with the victims and we know we have to take action. And that's why this government has been advocating very strongly to the federal government, in fact, led the charge to with the federal government to make bail policy reform. We're grateful for a commitment to make those changes, particularly around repeat violent offenders, and we'll continue to advocate for that, but we're not stopping. We're taking action, investing in programs in our province that will make this better for communities, including a repeat violent offenders task force. We're going to stand together and continue to take action with our community partners to make this better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Surrey South supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is that changes in the federal policy which strengthened a person's presumption of innocence never precluded Crown prosecutors from arguing that those who deserve to be held in custody be held in custody. It did not change, and frankly, this government is using it as a smokescreen for their own failed actions. The public has a right to know why a decision was made to stay the charge against a prolific offender for an unprovoked attack against an innocent mother and toddler. In every case involving prolific offenders, the public deserves to know details such as release conditions that the Crown has agreed with. Despite the Attorney General's claims of closely monitoring cases involving prolific offenders, the government has withheld the data they're tracking, preventing the public from seeing the results for themselves. The public has completely lost trust in the justice system under the soft-on-crime Premier. So will the Premier reconsider his refusal to give the public the data they're tracking and release that information today.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll start by saying that the BC Prosecution Service is better placed to answer questions regarding data, but that we are investing in programs and services, and I'm really happy to report that recently the BC Prosecution Service announced that the members for the Repeat Violent Offenders Task Force are now have been identified. They're currently receiving training and transitioning to their new positions. And the hubs will operate in every region of BC: Nanaimo, Victoria, Vancouver, Surrey, New Westminster, Abbotsford, Kamloops, Kelowna, Cranbrook, Prince George, Williams Lake, and Terrace. Mr. Speaker, we're investing in the services that we know will help to make this issue better across this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
House Leader of Third Party.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our public schools have a ratio of 1 counselor for every 693 students. It means when a child needs help, it's often not available to them. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, research in Canada shows increases in mental health referrals and hospitalizations, as well as high rates of anxiety, self-harm, substance use, and suicidal ideation. It was those who were already most vulnerable that suffered most, Mr. Speaker. Many students report having limited to no access to mental health support at school. There just aren't enough counselors to meet the needs of students. The ratio of counselors to students in the teachers' collective agreement is 1 counselor to every 700 students. It's been that way for 20 years. The president of the BC School Counselors Association, Dave McKenzie, said, quote, "When you consider how schools, society, and the conversations about mental health have changed, 20-year-old ratios are a travesty and deserve the attention from the Minister of Education." So my question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Education: when will this government meet the needs of students and hire enough school counsellors to cover the students' needs in this province?
Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I really appreciate the member's concern. I share the similar concerns about the mental well-being of our children. And as a government, we make it our priority. Since 2017, Mr. Speaker, we have hired nearly 300 teacher psychologists and counselors across the province. And we know how important the mental health and their well-being is, and it also helps in their learning as well, Mr. Speaker. And along with that, we are working across the ministry, whether it is with the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions or with the Minister of Children and Family Development. We are also trying to break the stigma around the issue of mental health. We have the integrated child and youth teams, Mr. Speaker, which are operating right now in 5 school districts, and we have just announced that will be extended to 7 more districts across the province. It is a very complex issue, no doubt, and I really agree with the member opposite that especially the challenges that we have faced in the last few years, how this issue has even aggravated. We take it as a priority, and recently, just this week, my colleague from Mental Health and Addictions was in Squamish opening the Foundry, which we know is also a very key resource for for our youth and our children, and we will continue to invest in the resources that are much needed.
House Leader, Third Party Supplemental.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our children need the support at school. It's where they spend many hours of their day through their youth growing up, and oftentimes the accessibility of a school counselor or psychologist will mean whether or not the child gets the kind of support that they need immediately, or whether or not the problem continues to grow. Unfortunately, and we know healthy kids and healthy lives, when you're a youth, make healthy adults. Catching mental health care needs early prevents lifelong illness, potential substance use disorders, and helps put children on a path to lifelong wellness, Mr. Speaker. We need to be investing in our children's mental health. We appreciate that the minister's added 300 new counselors and psychologists, but from everything that I'm hearing from our school system is that it's still far from enough. So I'll ask the question to the Minister of Education. Will the minister change the ratios so that there are enough student counselors and psychologists to meet the needs of our students?
Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I really appreciate the question. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, that it is our priority. We know that how important the mental health and the well-being of our children is, and as a government, we are investing in our education system, and especially working with the most vulnerable, most marginalized youth and students in our schools. And since 2017, we have made it a priority, and we will continue to do that. We know, Mr. Speaker, we have done a lot since 2017, but also we have been filling the gaps. We know the gaps that were left out by the previous government. We are trying to fill those gaps. We know a lot has been done, and we are committed to work even harder for this.
Member for West Vancouver, Capilano.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Halfway through a 10-year housing plan announced in 2018, the NDP have abandoned it and admitted defeat. The Premier is failing on housing by every measure. Is it funny that we don't have enough housing in this province? I don't think so. There are unprecedented levels of homelessness and social disorder. The housing hub has turned into a colossal housing flub and wasn't even mentioned in today's housing plan. BC continues to have the highest rents in the country and the most unaffordable housing in all of North America. BC housing is so dysfunctional that 4 out of 5 applications are sitting on desks there unapproved. The Premier's so-called housing refresh strategy has no credibility, while BC housing remains a disaster and the government continues to hide its forensic audit. Honourable Speaker, after the Premier has utterly failed as Housing Minister, how can he convince anyone to believe his new promises?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. And again, many times in this House, we've recognized that housing continues to be a challenge here in British Columbia. Record numbers of people coming to British Columbia for good opportunities. We welcome them. We want them here. We need them here. We hear from employers all the time. We need more people. How can we find more people? And they're coming, Honourable Speaker. But with that and rising interest rates, we're seeing additional pressures on our housing market. That's why, Honourable Speaker, that the plan that we brought in 2017 had significant improvements in our housing stock. We saw over 43,000 units have opened up because of the plan that we laid out. We're on track to meet our goals, Honourable Speaker, but we know we need more. We know we need more, Honourable Speaker, and that's why today we laid out the plan to ensure that we can position British Columbia in an even better place in the years ahead. Honourable Speaker, we know as a government that decades of underinvestment, decades of lack of investment in this province has led us to this problem. And you know, some would suggest that the solution to this challenge is to get out of the way and do nothing. Honourable Speaker, we've seen that formula. We've seen that formula in this previous government for a long time. It didn't work. It's actually the reason why we're in this problem now. That's why the actions we're taking on
Members. Members, let's hear the answer. Minister will continue.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And the member across the way says taxes, and she's referring to the speculation tax, Honourable Speaker. We know the Leader of the Opposition, Honourable Speaker.
Members.
We know, Honourable Speaker, that the Leader of the Opposition doesn't like the speculation tax. He thinks it's unfair for people who have multiple homes to have to pay an additional tax, Honourable Speaker. It's clear, Honourable Speaker, who the Leader of the Opposition works for. Honourable Speaker, on our side of the House, we're going to continue to work for people because we know this housing is vitally important.
Member for West Vancouver, Capilano, supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I would like to remind the Minister of what I said in the initial question, is that British Columbia has the highest rents in the country, and is the most unaffordable housing in North America. And this is a two-term government. So obviously, what is happening is not working. And I would like to address the speculation. NDP MLAs own 102 properties. And since the last election, NDP MLAs have profited by almost $8.5 million on real estate sales. So let's talk about speculation and what side of the house we're looking at. 8.5 million.
Members.
102 properties.
Members, order please.
So, Honourable Speaker, instead of trying to build his way out of a housing crisis, the Premier is trying to spin his way out of it. But a flashy branding exercise can't change the fact that housing affordability is getting worse. Even worse, the Premier's housing plan lacks transparency. Take the Premier's...
Members,
I'll follow
members.
the Minister of Housing's approach to speaking out in the House here. Take the Premier's promise to end single-family housing, for example, with no information about how that would work. The government couldn't even answer basic questions like where would this apply? So here's a basic question, Honourable Speaker. In which communities will the Premier be ending single-family zoning?
Minister of Housing.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I think it's important to note, and I'm sure the members across the way hear this as well, overwhelmingly when I'm in my community and communities around the province, I hear from seniors. I hear from seniors talking about how they're going to have their grandkids to be able to grow up near them. I hear from young families who want to stay in British Columbia. They want to have their kids grow up in the same neighborhood that they grew up in, Honourable Speaker. And that's been a challenge for people over the last 2 decades, lack of investments in British Columbia and housing, Honourable Speaker. And so, yeah, we're proud of the changes that we've proposed part of the housing strategy. And the member, if the member was serious, Honourable Speaker, and wanted to be part of the solution, she would look at her own community, West Vancouver, and say to her community that, yes, we need to bring on more housing, Honourable Speaker. She should be... Honourable Speaker, if the opposition is serious about housing, I say join us. Welcome them on this side of the House, Honourable Speaker. We are going to allow for more units to be built on single-dwelling homes. Honourable Speaker, we know that these lots, they may have single-family homes built on them, and that's okay, Honourable Speaker, because in the end of the day, as long as people want them, and as long as people can afford them, they'll continue to be built. The market will decide, but we need to allow more options on those sites, Honourable Speaker, and that's why this is such a fantastic policy that's being applauded across the board from all stakeholders. What we don't know, Honourable Speaker, is besides them saying that we're going to get out of the way and do nothing, what do they offer? What are they offering? Because we know, Honourable Speaker, when they were on this side of the House, they did nothing on housing.
Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Premier continues to conceal the forensic audit of the dysfunctional BC housing, the homeless crisis has never been worse. One example of the NDP's broken promise is to establish homeless navigation centres in Vancouver and Nanaimo, a promise made nearly 3 years ago. And I quote from the government release, "A non-profit partner will be selected this fall, and the navigation centre is expected to be operational by spring 2021. End quote. We have a snap election, the now Premier becomes the Minister of Housing, and the navigation centres get shelved. So my question is a direct one to the Premier. Why has he utterly failed when it comes to delivering the homeless navigation centres that government promised in 2021, to open in 2021?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank the member for the question. As I stated last week, we committed to opening a navigation centre in Nanaimo. We have found 2 sites. Both times they've gone to council, and council's made a decision that the sites are not appropriate for the navigation centre. And so that's a frustration for us, to do all the work, find a site, go to council, have it rejected, come back, find another site, go to...
it's frustrating, Honourable Speaker. But we know it's important work, and we know that local governments have an important role in this. And so we're going to continue to work with them to find that. As for the one in Vancouver, Honourable Speaker, if the members had a chance to read our plan that we released with Mayor Ken Sim from Vancouver, part of that is having a centre that will be opening very shortly that will ensure that those that are looking for supports are able to go to one place and not only find housing, but also get the supports they need. And so, again, we're excited to see that space open up. Not only that, Honourable Speaker, but we have 330 units opening by the end of June that will help support those that are looking for it. Honourable Speaker, I'll just say on the downtown east side in particular, an important piece. There are spaces available right now for those that are in encampments, in particular those on Hastings Street. It is not safe. We agree with Mayor Sim, this is not a safe space for people. We had a survey done by a not-for-profit which interviewed 50 women. All 50 reported to be sexually assaulted, Honourable Speaker. That is unacceptable. So we are urging those folks to take the shelter spaces. They're available. We have brought them online. And on top of that, we have additional spaces opening up in the coming weeks and months ahead.
Sari White Rock, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I give the minister a bit of advice here. I think he needs to work on his relationship with the mayor of Nanaimo, because he says, and I quote, "Nanaimo is desperate for a navigation center. We've been waiting a long time," end quote. This was a promise made in 2020. And again, this minister gets up today and says, yeah, it may be a priority today. An absolute, utter failure when it comes to something this NDP has overpromised and underdelivered on. So again, when we look at Nanaimo here, it is very clear that this premier, this minister, these MLAs have completely failed their community. So why did this premier fail to deliver on something like homeless navigation centers?
Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Clearly, they've run out of material for question period. They keep asking the same question that I just gave an answer to a second ago.
Let's hear it, please. Members, Minister will continue.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As I've shared with the member now, and I did last week as well, we found a site in Nanaimo for a navigation centre. It didn't suit council's needs. We went away. We found another site. It didn't meet the needs of council, and now we're working to find an additional site. Honourable Speaker, that's the work we've been doing, not only there in communities around the province, working with local governments to make sure that the supports we can find fit well with community, Honourable Speaker. But it's not only that, Honourable Speaker. If you look back over the years, the significant size of the encampments that Nanaimo had, the incredible amount of work it took to get people out of those encampments and get people into housing, Honourable Speaker. In Nanaimo alone, Honourable Speaker, 1,437 units that have come. That we have funded. 881 open, and 556 that are funded, that are going through the process and being built right now, Honourable Speaker. That is significant. In fact, that's probably the amount of units that the previous government built around the province, Honourable Speaker. And so we continue to make these investments in Nanaimo, Honourable Speaker, because it's important, but we're going to make these investments in communities throughout the province.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we heard earlier today from this government, I think it's as close or charitable of a description as we can have with their new housing numbers, as creative accounting was used today as they were trying to justify and explain what their failures over the last 6 years have been on the housing file. So, Mr. Speaker, it's no wonder that BC Housing is under a forensic audit when we see how this government likes to play fast and loose with numbers when it comes to housing. Unfortunately, despite the province, this government having the BC Housing Forensic Audit for the better part of a month now, we're no closer to having that released. In fact, under Section 25 of the Freedom of Information Act, the Premier has the power to release that. But instead of releasing it, Mr. Speaker, we're waiting on the same agencies that were the result of this audit needing to be done to go through that audit with a felt pen and cross out anything and everything that might actually shine a light on what's going on in BC Housing. Imagine what would have happened today if the Premier had had the temerity to actually release that audit full and unredacted while they were talking about housing with all the provincial media there. Imagine the transparency that would have provided to the public about what's actually going on in housing in British Columbia. Instead, organizations like Atira and BC Housing and others are going to be busy with their Sharpies over the next few weeks. If this Premier is actually serious about transparency when it comes to housing, that report would already be released. Will the Premier take the power that he has under Section 25 of the Freedom of Information Act and release today, unredacted, the BC Housing Forensic Audit and make it available to public accounts for full and proper scrutiny?
Premier.
Member knows I've stood in this place a number of times, made the commitment, I'll make it again. We'll release the report in full to the extent the law allows us to do that. Now, when I became Premier Honourable Speaker, I committed to work on 4 priorities for British Columbians: on public safety, on housing, on healthcare, and a strong economy that works for everybody. On public safety, in May, we will have 21 teams of prosecutors, new prosecutors, probation officers, correction officers, addressing chronic repeat violent offenders. The Minister for Public Safety and the Attorney General went to Ottawa, got a commitment from Ottawa, a strong commitment to fix the federal bail rules. On housing today, a plan that community organizations, home builders, people who support affordable housing for people who work hard, earn a decent living, can't find a place to live, they are celebrating this. I'm going to read a Homes for Living YYJ quote. "First look at the Housing for People Action Plan. This is huge!" exclamation mark. And that is on top of us setting a record over the last 5 years, more housing units delivered in British Columbia than any 5-year period ever in the history of the province. Healthcare, a new deal with family doctors.
Members.
On healthcare, a new deal with family doctors so British Columbians get the family doctor that they deserve. Making sure that when people go to hospital to get the care they need by recognizing the credentials of internationally trained nurses so they can get to work and help people in the hospital, and working closely with nurses to make sure that our healthcare system works for everybody. And on a strong economy that works for British Columbians, Honourable Speaker, almost $5 billion in major project investments. Now, since I became Honourable Speaker, I know we've got a lot more work to do.
I know the members don't like it. I know the opposition doesn't like it. Members will come to order, please.
But this team that we've got here is delivering for British Columbians every single day, and we're not going to stop.
The bell ends the question period.